Good morning, dear students. I hope you all are doing good. Today we will start with a new chapter from your text titled Brown Wolf by Jack London. So, before we start with the chapter, let us first learn a little bit about the writer Jack London. Jack London was an American author and journalist known for his adventure stories. He explored several regions and their cultures in his stories and wrote about life and death. His adventure stories are based on his own experiences at sea, in Alaska, and in the fields and factories of California. So, Jack London, is an American author who wrote one of the novels titled Brown Wolf, which tells the story of a brown colored wolf. Now, the characters in this story include Walt Irwin, Match, the wolf, and Skiff Miller, the owner of the brown wolf. They called him Wolf. In build and coat, which means that in size and shapes, he was a huge timber wolf or a variety of wolves which has a grey coat and is mostly found in the northern regions of North America. And he advertised or he showed himself as a dog. He was brown, deep brown, red brown, a mixture of browns, and in his eyes were twin topazes. Twin, which means two. Topazes is a clear yellow semi precious stones, golden and brown. Walt Irwin and Madge loved him so much, and it had been a much difficult task to win his love. When the wolf arrived at the couple's cottage, he was seen to be unsociable, which means that he doesn't like to be with other people. He disliked their efforts of trying to get close to him and even refused to let them touch him. But he still stayed there as he was tired and famished, or he was tired and hungry, and later, when he recovered, he simply left and disappeared. One day, if Walt had not spotted him along the railway lines and brought him back home, it might have been the end for him. So he then got him a metal plate written on it, returned to Walt Irwin, and attached it to a collar strapped around his neck. So whenever he disappeared, he could return back. But Walt thought that it was probably because of his homing instinct. Why? Because whenever he disappeared, he always went north. After a few years of unsuccessful attempts to disappear, Wolf finally decided to stay at the cottage. But it took a long time for the couple to gain the dog's trust because whenever strangers wanted to pet him, they were greeted with an angry growl or an angry sound. As Walt and Madge walked along the country's road one morning with Wolf being trailed or pulled behind, they heard a crunching footsteps followed by a man. Walt greeted the man. He paused and nodded. To his reply, the man said that he wasn't used to the warmth and that he prefers the weather being cold. He also mentioned that he was looking for his sister, whose name goes by Mrs. William Johnson. Madge then asked the man if he was Mrs. Johnson's Klondike brother. Klondike is an inhabitant of the Klondike region, which is in the northwestern Canada, where gold was delivered. Okay, so Madge asked the man if he was Mrs. Johnson's Klondike's brother, whom they've heard so much, and to that he replied yes, and he introduced his name as Skiff Miller, who ought to surprise her sister. Madge then said to Miller that he was on the right path and to take a shortcut to her house. Now it was at this point of time that Wolf quickly walked towards the man, and as soon as he saw the dog, he was astonished to see him. At the sound of his voice, Wolf's ears flattened down and he let out a laugh. He went up to the stranger and smelled his hands, then licked it with his tongue. The couple was amazed to see Wolf becoming friendly to a stranger which they have never seen before. Skiff Miller lifted one of Wolf's forelegs and examined the footpads, pressing them. He also mentioned that he wasn't on a trail for a long time. He then turned to Madge and Walt and asked them for how long have they had him. But just then, the dog with excitement was wriggling from side to side and opened his mouth and barked. The couple stared at each other and thought that a miracle has happened. Why? Because Wolf barked for the first time since being acquainted with the couple. Madge smiled at Miller and thought that he was basically a humorist. Now, what do you mean by a humorist? A humorist is a person who often makes others laugh with jokes and amusing stories. Okay, so Madge smiled at Miller and thought that he was basically a humorist since he had only seen the dog for only 5 minutes. Skiff Miller stared at Madge and said slowly that he thought that she understood that it was his dog and that his name was not Wolf but it was Brown. Now, Skiff commanded Brown to stop or to mush on from swinging and squirming. And what did the dog do? He ceased immediately and halted obediently. Skiff Miller smiled proudly and exclaimed that Brown was his lead dog. To this saying, the couple was surprised and asked him if he was gonna take the dog away, and if he did, they ought to buy the dog if he was gonna sell him. Skiff then said that maybe he can make his own choice whether to stay or leave with him. He asked the couple to stay right where they were and bade them goodbye and walked off. He also said that he can make his own choice and that none of them would question the choice Wolf made or call him back. So as he was leaving, Wolf heard him and lifted his head quickly and sprang up on his hind legs and at the same time licking Skiff Miller's hands. Now when the two men shook hands, Wolf repeated his act and licking both of their hands. Now, for a short while, Wolf watched Miller go and sprang towards him and tried to make him pause or to make him stop, but failing in this, he returned back to the couple, snuggled in Madge's laps as a sign when someone is begging for favors, but when later he waited for longer than a minute and his eyes were set on the trail, he began to take quick steps and ran towards Miller, cutting sharply across the curve and was long gone. So, in this story, we see how the author Jack London introduces us to a couple, okay, who has a dog by the name of Wolf. And later, he also introduces us to Skiff Miller, who is actually the owner of the dog. And we see how the three characters in the story have to choose whether to keep or lose the dog that they love. So I hope you've understood the chapter and I would want you to go through the chapter once again. Thank you.